Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Montana Spine and Pain's Understanding Pain class, or what we call our Guide to Living the Good Life. This is the fourth talk, the fourth section of our class, and it's on stress and pain. So near and dear to my heart, certainly, because I think that stress and pain are connected, and both are really important. Before we get too far along here, I want to start with a body scan, just a very quick body scan for all of us to kind of take a baseline of how your body is feeling right now as you're watching this class. So hopefully you're in a comfortable chair and wearing comfortable clothing, and you have a nice, good cup of tea or coffee to relax and sip. I'm just going to invite you for the next 30 seconds, eyes open or closed, whatever feels best for you, to just check in with your body and see how it's feeling, see how you are doing. I'm also going to invite you to pay specific attention to how you feel that your stress level is right now. You can use a number scale, although we talked about number scales are not always helpful. You can use a color code for, yellow, red, green, whatever makes sense to you. Just take a moment and scan your body for stress, discomfort. And where does stress usually show up in your body? Where do you carry it? Is it in the neck and the shoulders? Is it in the face and the jaw? Is it kind of all over? So let's just take the next few moments and really connect with the body in this moment. Great. Good. So what I'd like to do now is have us go ahead and do our quieting exercise today. This is, of course, something that I got off of YouTube from Wise Mind and Body, and it is a guided meditation working specifically with anxiety. So I would invite you to sit back, relax, again, eyes open or closed, and enjoy for about the next 9.5 minutes.
Allow yourself to get comfortable. You can be seated or you can lie down for this meditation. Take a few deep breaths, inhaling deeply and exhaling slowly. Allow yourself to let go of any stress you've been feeling. Let go of any tension in your shoulders. Let go of any tension in your jaw. Allowing your breath to return to normal. Simply bring your awareness to what it feels like to breathe right now. Notice the physical sensations of breathing. Wherever that physical sensation of breathing is the most vivid, place your awareness there. You might feel it most in the rise and fall of your abdomen. You might feel it most in your nostrils. Wherever that sensation is the clearest, simply place your focus right there. Experience the inhale. Experience the exhale. Experience the in-between. And each time that you notice that the momentum of your mind has drawn your awareness away from your breath, gently, non-judgmentally, place your attention back on your breath. You might find it helpful to say within your mind, inhale each time you inhale, and exhale each time you exhale. By silently saying these words, you draw your attention back to your breath. Your mind will wander. Simply notice when it does, and with compassion and love for yourself, accept that your mind has wandered, and bring your awareness back to the physical sensation of breathing. Observe each breath as though it's the first breath you've ever taken. This is an opportunity to pay attention to this present moment. Place your attention on your breath in this present moment. Simply notice and feel what it feels like to breathe in this present moment. And as the momentum of the mind draws your awareness away from your breath, kindly and gently bring your awareness back to your breath. Allow yourself to explore this moment, to be curious about this moment, to allow your breath to open up the doorway to this moment. As you prepare to come out of this meditation, notice how you feel in your body. Take a moment to feel this feeling of presence. Take a moment to experience it, to notice what it feels like in your body to be present. Offer yourself a little gratitude for taking the time to be present. And carry this feeling of presence with you as you go out into your day. May you be present. May you be peaceful. May you be gentle on yourself today. Blessings.
Okay, that seems like a good place to stop. I really love that last piece about may you be peaceful and may you be gentle on yourself. What was your experience like as you went through that last nine minutes or so? What was it like for you to connect with your body in the present? For those of you who frequently do meditations like this, what was that like for you? If you don't usually do something like this, I'm curious to know what that was like for you. Was it challenging or difficult at all to stop the racing thoughts, which they're not going to stop, they're going to keep going, right? Was it hard to connect with or tune into a body that is struggling? Did you experience a slowing down, a relaxation, a difference in what your stress or tension level was from a moment ago before we started? If not, that's totally fine. If you did, I'm curious what changed, what shifted for you, especially since it was just 9.5 minutes. We will be doing a lot of quieting work in this particular talk, simply because it's such a crucial part, again, of mind, body, health, and wellness, and particularly when we are working with pain directly, but when we're also working with stress and anxiety, whether it's related to pain or not. So thank you for being willing to try that. I always encourage, if folks are going to get, meditation, gosh, let's try that again. That's not my talk to do. I don't prescribe medication. If you're going to do meditation, if you're going to download meditation apps on your phone, which I think is great, or if you're going to get like podcasts or anything like that, that you try a bunch, that you try a few, and that you find, music that you like and a voice that you like. It can be challenging to do meditation internally without a guiding voice at first when you're starting out. And for some of us, a seated meditation may not be active enough. So something like gentle yoga Tai Chi, Qigong, a walking meditation can be great. We're going to talk a lot about quieting practices, especially in this section. And so that was the first one. Thanks for being willing to do that experiment. So just some of the resources and tools that we will be working with today that hopefully are on our website. As always, we have our lovely blue book. Thank you, Patrick Davis. A lot of this material is in chapter 4, which is the chapter on stress. A lot of the material is not, because it's material that I have learned and put together over the years and worked with, both in my teaching career and then also working directly with patients and in my own experience. So if you're following along in the book, know that it's a guide, but it's probably a loose guide. And as always, we'll be working with the protectometer and the Explain Pain and Explain Pain Supercharged books. And we're also going to use a specific handout that will talk a lot about our own functional goal setting and setting goals related to that felt sense of safety and that felt sense of danger again. And it's called the Pain Truth. So if you're looking on our website and our list of resources, it says the Pain Truth and nothing but 20 questions and goals. We're going to use this today because I think it can be such a helpful way of, first of all, looking at the areas of threat or possible danger that are going on in our lives other than pain. And you might be saying, well, I'm here for the pain. What else is there? You might be surprised at the other stressors that are exacerbating or contributing to the overall level of danger and therefore driving up that pain experience. But what I like about this handout most of all, actually, is that it also has you assess your safety score, or looking at all of the things that are going right in your life and with you and your practices. So often I think sometimes we want to think about ourselves in terms of what is not going well, what's going wrong, what's not working. And in some cases, well-meaning healthcare providers can also focus on symptoms and what's wrong, instead of really being able to step back and hold space for ourselves as whole persons. And there is a lot more than likely, going right for us physically and emotionally than there is going wrong. And it's really important to notice that and recalibrate and include all of the things that I'm doing in my life, that you are doing in your life, that are really supportive of you and really supportive overall of your health and well-being. None of us is just a collection of symptoms or a diagnosis or one particular problem, right? We're all complex human beings. And so we'll go over this handout in a moment. So if you've printed that out or you have it with you, great. As always, I think it can be helpful to keep a notebook and something to write with, so that if you have questions as we go through and then you look back at the end of the talk, hopefully I've answered them. If not, as always, you're welcome to reach out. If you're seeing this with someone else, I really want to encourage you to be as interactive with each other as you possibly can. Pause this recording, stop and talk about something, stop and disagree with something and write that down. It's really, this is your program to use and get as much out of as you can. Okay. So we're going to go back to ancient Greece for our quote, "Nothing endures but change." And especially right now, where and when this is being taped, here we are in May of 2021, having been involved in a worldwide pandemic now for some 14 long months. It's obviously a very fascinating time to be here and to be in healthcare and just to be in the world. And how do we feel about change? And is there a difference that we notice related to stress level if it's change that we are choosing and that we are planning and kind of inviting into our life, or if it's change that comes upon us that we are simply having to adapt to? So we'll be talking a lot about adaptation, stress, change, and how we cope with that. So let's talk a little bit. We all have a pretty good understanding of what we mean when we say, I'm so stressed out, or gosh, I'm totally stressed, or this is stressful. We have a very good sense of what we mean when we say that. So what I would like to do is also offer up some terminology that comes from the field of health psychology, which is part of my professional background, is health psychology. And the study of mind, body, spirit connection to ourselves, our health practices and behaviors, and how those are likely influenced, and how our health behaviors can certainly impact ourselves and others. And a big part of health psychology research, of course, is looking at the stress response in mammals, particularly human animals, and the studies that have been done that really look at the impact overall of a process as important as stress. So I'll add a little bit of clinical definition to your kind of working definition of how do you know when you're stressed. But that's my first question for you. And I would like you, if you want to answer out loud, that's great. If you're there with somebody and you want to talk about what are your signs and your warnings that you know your stress response is there or is on the way. And if you'd rather just write it out, I want you to pause this recording right now and just spend 3-5 minutes, something like that. How do you know for sure that you're going to experience stress or you're already there? What are the signs? What are the signs for you? Okay, so part of what we do this exercise for is to be able to talk about all of the emotional and physical symptoms of I'm really moving into a stress response. Part of it is to note how aware we are or not of it. Some of us are pretty good at knowing when stress is coming for us. Others of us may not know until it's already there, or others in our life may be able to spot it first and ask us, you okay? You seem a little stressed out. Stress is a mind, body, spirit phenomenon, of course. And so there may be physical symptoms of your stress response that you notice. For me, I'm always noticing, tension in the neck and shoulders a little bit. I'm doing this and I'm not dropping the shoulders and relaxing. I have more of a sense of time urgency. I don't have enough time is a frequent thought when stress is coming for me. Speaking of which, during the meditation, which again was 9.5 minutes, I can remember one of my earliest meditation teachers was when I was in school. Not usually a time that you associate with lots of extra free time to meditate. And I remember the original instruction was you will be doing morning meditation for 20 minutes a morning. And my immediate thought that apparently came out of my mouth was 20 minutes? There's no earthly way I have time to do that in the morning. There's no way that I have time to spend meditating 20 minutes a morning. And the instructor very kindly, gently looked at me and said, lovely, in that case, you'll need to double it. So to this day, I think of that, and each and every time the thought comes of, I don't have time for meditation, food, water, a bathroom break, just to do a body scan, I remember that voice and I say to myself, okay, let's go ahead and double it then. And even just in that 9.5 minutes, of the meditation this morning, what I was aware of is that immediately, even though I was not particularly tense or stressed out to begin this morning, I immediately slowed down and deepened and became more present. So 9.5 minutes well spent. So hopefully you have an idea physically, emotionally, energetically, behaviorally, what your stress signals are. Keep looking for those because they're important, because when we're aware, I'm starting to have a stressful thought, my body's responding, my mood is changing, then we can start interrupting and working directly with that stress response. But let's define our terms here with what we're talking about. Stress is a perceptual, context, subjective experience of what the body and the mind goes through when our stress response is triggered. More on that later. In other words, my stress response is unique to me, although there is going to be some similarity, of course, between humans, and what your stress response looks like and feels like. And by the way, what will trigger your stress response is unique to you. And that's a really important part of stress in humans, is that a lot of it is going to depend on, first of all, past experience. I'm pointing at the back of my brain here where the memory centers are. But second of all, it's going to depend on appraisal. The cognitive appraisal of whether or not something is stressful will often be a cue for the body to begin activating that stress response. When we're talking about the stress response, it is a fairly automatic, not completely always, but it's a fairly automatic response by the brain and then the rest of the body to the perception of danger, internally or externally again. So it should be sounding a lot like connected to DIMS and SIMS. The stress response and all of the reactions that go with it are designed to return back to a resting state. When the stressor goes away, that's when the stress response is working as it should. We do refer to this sometimes as the fight, flight, or freeze response very frequently. And again, I think about stress on a spectrum of all the way up to what we would consider persistent stress, all the way up to a stressor that's significant enough to result in a post-traumatic stress disorder. So that's a range of stressors. By the way, we do not have to have a stressor up to the level of what we would think would cause post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD in order to have persistent stress and have our body have to adapt to that. In fact, persistent pain can also be a stressor since it feels and seems very threatening to us. Okay. And what is a stressor? An internal or external event that is likely to trigger the stress response. So again, pain can be a stressor, right? There are many, many different internal and external stressors that we will be talking about. So more terminology. As I've said before, what we human beings define as a stressor depends on the cognitive appraisal. And that cognitive appraisal depends on our individual situation, our past experiences with coping with stressors in the past, and how likely we are to feel overwhelmed in the moment. In other words, it's highly individual. And it also depends on a lot of past experiences and what our resources are. So let me give you an example. If I am taking a drive on a day off, somewhere down Highway 93, I'm going to go down and look at the mountains and maybe go for a hike. So I'm not really in a rush, and I get a flat tire, but I have, a full tank of gas. It's sunny out. I know how to change a tire, or I have somebody with me who can help me change a tire. First of all, I have a spare tire that I can use, or I have a AAA card and I can afford to pay for AAA when they come. And I'm not really, going anywhere specific. It was literally just a pleasure drive. How likely am I going to be to define that event of I have a flat tire as stressful? So long as there's not an accident and so long as I'm safely off the road, I might not. I might define it as irritating or disappointing, because now my trip is interrupted. And I might not really think very much of it at all, other than, okay, let's change the tire and then let's go get that fixed, right? So it's a lot of ifs and a lot of buts. But let's use the same example, but with entirely different context. Because again, so much of our stress response, so much of our pain depends very much on the context. What if it wasn't a day off? What if it wasn't a pleasure drive? What if I am driving to a job interview for a job that I really want and badly need? What if I don't have a lot of extra gas in the tank and I gave myself enough time to get there, but the likelihood that I'm going to be late is really, really high? And what if it's a rainy, stormy morning? And so even being out there trying to change the tire, if I can do that, I'm going to get soaked. And maybe I don't know how to change a tire. Maybe I open the back of the trunk and the spare or the donut aren't in there. I don't have AAA. And calling a tow truck, by the time I do that, I've likely missed the interview. How high would the stress response appraisal be in that particular situation? Okay. Probably pretty significant. Now, it's the same stressor. I had a flat tire, right? But again, the cognitive appraisal piece is going to be really, really significant and really salient with whether or not I will say this is really stressful, right? And whether or not my body is going to follow us there. It's going to be really challenging in that second scenario to not appraise that as being really, really stressful. Okay, so just an example there. When we talk about stress, I love that psychology has terms for unhelpful stress, which we call distress, and also stress from positive events, which we call eustress. So when we talked a little bit about change, some stressful life events are things like having a baby, graduating from high school or college, retiring, getting a new job, stopping or starting a job. So those events that we would ordinarily think of as being really, really happy and really good can also have their share of stress, right? Part of it is if something significant in life is changing and we're adapting to that, we have the ability to adapt to that, and it can be stressful. Probably one of the clearest, best ways that I know how to define stress is that it's something that if we feel as though we don't have the resources, inner, outer, or both, to cope with, the likelihood that we're going to define it as a stressor is much, much higher. So in my first scenario with the flat tire, I had the resources to cope with it. I had, maybe a friend with me or somebody I could call for a ride, or I could change the tire myself, or I had money to kind of cope with that situation. Or if I had all of those, that can help that event from, instead of blowing up to be a significant stressor, it can just be, okay, it's irritating or it's disappointing. But if I have the perception that I do not have the outer resources like money or social support from others or medical insurance or time, right? Or the internal resources, the knowledge, the ability, the experience, and that sense of agency. I can cope with this. I know how to change a tire because I've done it before. If my inner resources or outer resources are not sufficient for what I'm facing, the likelihood that I'm going to have a stress response is much higher. Okay. So in other words, like pain, stress is really subjective and really, really dependent on the context. So when we talk about short-term versus persistent stress, you know, the stress response in mammals, including humans, is again a protective output. It is a protective response of the brain. Obviously, it affects the mind and the body and the spirit. But our stress response is a fantastic adaptation to circumstances that could potentially be life-threatening, and the stress response allows us to meet those challenges, okay? So like pain, it is a fantastic adaptation to being mammals in a world that has some threats in it, okay? The threats in modern times have changed somewhat since, you know, way back when we were living in small herds. But nonetheless, the stress response has evolved and adapted with us. So our bodies are pretty well designed to have occasional acute stress, right? So if we think about a short-term stressor, usually this is something that is caused by a really clear stressor that has a pretty recent onset. And the stressor itself doesn't necessarily last very long. So for example, if we're back traveling on the highway again, and there's a driver in the other lane that does something foolish, and we have to make a very quick decision to avoid that driver, to slow down, to brake, you know, one of those close calls, chances are the body is going to have appraised that as threatening, responded, and will be in the stress response probably before that close call is over with. And we may notice after we do that, that, okay, wow, I'm shaky, I'm sweaty, nervous laughter, those kinds of things. That's not going to be a lot of cognitive appraisal. If there's, you know, something coming at us, the body is going to respond fairly quickly. That's what it's designed to do. Public speaking, if speaking in front of others is something that just gives us significant anxiety and nerves, usually what will happen is once we go through that, we give the talk or we make the comment at work, we're done with that, we feel much, much better, okay? So those are short-term stressors. What we are often most curious about, what I am most curious about when I'm working with patients with pain, and just patients in general, because of what I do, as a clinical psychologist who works with health conditions and looking at trauma-informed care, working with people who have trauma and PTSD. What I'm also very curious about is the level of persistent or prolonged stress that they are in currently, they have been in the past, or what might be coming up ahead for them. So persistent stress is basically what it says here, is that there's something that is going on internally or externally, which basically means that the stress response is overactive, it's overprotective, and it doesn't quite get a chance to shut down, okay? What we are particularly concerned about is persistent stressors that have a link to early childhood experiences. So how does that matter? If you come in and see me and you're an adult, why am I asking you if you had adverse experiences or stressors in your childhood? Because while the brain is still developing, and we had talked before about how we're bioplastic and we're neuroplastic, but the brain, along with our stress response and our central nervous system protective responses, including pain, are still developing until early adulthood, 21, 22. So what happens to us in childhood in terms of persistent stress or persistent health conditions or pain, all of those can be considered stressors, actually change the way that the brain responds to further stressors down the road. And it can impair some of the body's natural ability to deal with that stress response. So the analogy here, the image that I like to use is the stress response is like a rubber band, right? What we want with a rubber band is that when it's not being stretched by stress in this case, it's pretty tight and it holds its shape. If you stretch a rubber band out once, it will go back to its natural shape, hopefully pretty quickly. So I think about that as the body's stress response. It gets stretched out to accommodate the stress response, and the relaxation response helps it pull back. And that is what our body is designed to do. But over time, if we're activating the stress response and it's not being allowed to ever fully shut down, in other words, the relaxation response can't help us consistently, the rubber band is going to get stretched and stretched and stretched, such that trying to relax physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually becomes extraordinarily difficult to do. Some of the situations that can cause that, whether they started in early life or adulthood, repeated abusive experiences. We don't necessarily differentiate in this situation between emotional, physical, sexual abuse. These things, of course, are very different and have different impact on the person experiencing them. But abusive experiences that reiterate the felt sense of not being safe in one's own home, not being safe in one's family, in one's environment, in one's school, all of those experiences are repeated stressors that the brain and the rest of our body has to try to navigate through, okay? Persistent pain, not surprisingly, is an internal stressor that if we perceive it to be life-threatening or life-limiting in some way, can and often will activate a stress response on its own, which again is why we spend so much time in this program and when we work individually with patients, being very clear about, with the appropriate medical imaging and examination, what we must do, and I don't use words like must terribly often, but what we really must do is uncouple or separate the notion from pain, meaning tissue damage or danger. So that if you can be assured by knowledgeable medical professionals who are very experienced at this, that your pain is painful, but not dangerous to you and not harmful to your body, hopefully the stressor of, oh my gosh, what is this pain doing to me, can be worked with and hopefully let go of and hopefully downregulated, okay? Certainly if our home environment, if our work environment, if our school environment is hostile or really lonely, that can cause a prolonged stress response as well. We are, physiological creatures that connect with one another. And if we had any doubt or needed a reminder of the importance of social support and close proximity, we've certainly had a lot of that during this pandemic. I mean, that's part of why we're doing online classes instead of meeting in person. But there is a biological reality to how we feel when we are physically close to people or animals that we love, and how our brains do with that, and the stress of isolation physically from others. That's real. It's very, very real. We bioregulate with one another. And if we are not in close proximity to children or spouses or loved ones or animals or coworkers, we feel that physically and we feel it as a stressor, okay? So what happens connected with pain and stress? As we talked about before, both stress and pain are protective outputs of the brain. And in some cases, they can work together. So I'm looking here at the bottom and where it says stress-induced analgesia, pain control. With short-term stress, oftentimes, depending on what it is, one of the things that the body will do in response to a short-term stressor is it will release endorphins and enkephalins. This is to help us cope, right? This is to help us deal with is there going to be pain, right? You may experience this after you have a stressor like, the close call on the highway. This is what you might be going through if you feel like, oh wow, now I'm having an adrenaline rush. That's the geniuses in your brain and your body releasing endorphins and enkephalons along with other chemicals to help you deal with this stressor. Okay, so our bodies are fairly well set up. We've adapted over millions of years in order to be able to have a stress response that includes analgesia. So our own endogenous opioids get released, we feel those, and then hopefully we don't have another stress response for a while. What happens though, if we are having persistent stress, not necessarily up to the level always of a panic attack or a fight, flight, or freeze response, but we are always having persistent stress that does not fully downregulate or stop or relax for very long, or we're having repeated episodes of stress. People who are in conflictual family relationships or marriages or workplaces in which there's anything going on from the fear of stress and layoffs, which certainly has happened a lot this year, to workplace bullying, to unfair treatment from a supervisor. All of those things can put us in a state of pretty consistent stress response. What happens over time is that we will deplete, we will use up the supply of endorphins, the endogenous opioids. And in fact, stress will actually increase sensitivity and increase the likelihood that pain will go up rather than being blocked if it were an acute stressor. That's kind of a fast and furious overview of that. We're going to talk a lot more about some of the physiological side effects of the stress response if it persists. But first, I have another invitation for you, another experiment for you to do, because so much of this depends upon our own experience of the mind-body connection. And if you are already really familiar with and are aware of how your mind and your emotions and your experience and your body are connected, that's great. If you are not aware, or you're somewhat skeptical, that's even better. Here's the invitation. Here's what I would like all of us to do. Okay, this is going to be an enjoyable experiment, hopefully, and not having anything to do with stress or pain. So here's what I would like you to do. And if looking at the picture of the lemon makes this easier, great, go ahead and do that. But what I would like you to do in your imagination is picture that you are at the store, or even better, out in a citrus grove, and that you are holding a beautiful, ripe, luscious lemon. It can be a Meyer lemon, it can be just a regular lemon, doesn't matter. I want you to hold it in your hand, and I want you to feel the weight of that lemon. Feel the texture of that peel. Good. And I want you to lean down, and I want you to smell that amazing lemon rind. Most of the citrus oil that actually has the lemon flavor is in the peel, not the fruit. So really just smell that. And maybe in your imaginary kitchen or your lemon grove, that's a whole other guided imagery. You have a zester and you have a knife, right? I just use a knife. Go ahead and take your knife and cut off a little bit of that peel and really, really take a nice deep inhale of that beautiful lemon. And if you think about the favorite foods or beverages that have a lemon in it for you, do you like just homemade lemonade? Is lemon meringue pie kind of your thing? Lemon bars, I don't know, the possibilities are endless. Do you just take a slice of lemon and put it in your tea? Great. So now go ahead and take your knife and cut the lemon in half so that you can see the beautiful triangular sections of this beautiful fruit. And just go ahead and take a nice big How long has it been since you've smelled a good fresh lemon? Such a lovely, lovely, lovely smell. Okay, and go ahead and cut a cross section of the lemon, or a wedge, whatever you like. I wonder if there's some sort of debate between people who like a lemon wedge in their iced tea versus a cross section. I don't know. Go ahead and take a cross section or take a piece out of there and really just notice the juices and the smell. Notice that outer yellow rind that is so beautiful, and that white part underneath the rind. Okay. Really just give it a good smell. Now I want you to take the lemon section and I want you to put it in your mouth and take a bite. How was that for you? Even if you knew that I was going to do that, how many of you had a salivary response to that imaginary lemon that you were holding for maybe a minute or two? Statistically, quite a number of us will have an automatic salivary response to even the suggestion of biting a lemon. Why? How does that work? Doesn't make any sense. It's an imaginary lemon. Because stored in the sense memory of your brain, stored in the experiential memory of your brain that uses your sensory information, you have multiple experiences yourself of biting a lemon, watching what happens when other people bite a lemon, watching their facial expressions, knowing what happens to cause that instinctive facial expression of biting a lemon, unless you really love biting lemons, and your body responds to all of the variables that we've talked about, the seeing, the smelling, the lemonade, the foods, all of that. You have those memories and your body will follow you there. So, and that was a minute or two with an imaginary lemon. So what we want to be curious about, again, when we talk about the stress response and when we talk about the pain response, knowing that both of those are protective outputs of the brain to help us survive in the world, how much of our stress response or how much of our pain response can also be about prior memory and prior experiences, and how much of it is dependent on context. If you hate lemons and would never pick one up and smell it, you probably didn't do this exercise. If you love lemons, maybe you salivated anyway, but didn't find that unpleasant, right? It's very, very different. So I want you to remember the power of the lemon, okay? In other words, the incredible power of past experience, context, imagination, and how our body will follow us there. One of the most powerful questions, as I think I've shared with you, during the initial psychology program in health psychology, not accidentally, one of the very first classes that we got to have with Dr. Lester, who I thanked and mentioned before, was a class on stress and disease. So the connection between the stress response and health conditions in humans and other animals, but we're talking about humans. And so one of the most powerful questions that Dr. Lester invited us to consider as we started learning about the physiology of what can happen over time with persistent stress that is not interrupted is this, whatever this is, whatever event, whatever internal or external stressor, is this worth a stress response? Is this worth a stress response? In some cases, like the near misses that we've talked about, or you find out a loved one is hurt or ill, your answer might be, yes, absolutely. It's worth a stress response. I've already had it. In other cases, though, what we want to be curious about, knowing how our particular mind, body, spirit experiences stress, learning what we're going to learn about the interaction with some chronic health conditions, including pain and stress, we do want to be curious about, okay, is this stress response that I'm conditioned to have in this situation, is it necessary? Is this response, is this situation going to be worth a full stress response? I'll give you an example from my own life just to give some sort of context to this so that I'm not talking about abstraction, because I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I have a long-standing concern or worry about being late to things. Just part of my brain, just part of my past experience. And I know this about myself. And usually I plan things so that I'm not late, so that I'm altogether not experiencing what I consider avoidable stress. It's avoidable stress, so why not offload it and not do it? But of course, I don't have total control over my environment, and I don't always get my way. Gosh, that's stressful. Feeling as though, by the way, that we have choice and control and agency in our world is a key part of self-efficacy, or whether or not we feel as though we can navigate and manage and cope with things, including stress. So meanwhile, back to my worry about being late. What if I'm on my way to work, and work is going to start with a meeting where everybody's going to be there, and it's pretty obvious if you're on time or not? Okay, so I normally leave long enough in advance that it's fine. I'm not usually going to be late. And what if I'm in my car and I'm crossing the railroad tracks and the dreaded arm comes down, the lights flash, and I am going to have to wait for the train? And depending on how long I'm going to be waiting, it's maybe going to be 1 or 2 minutes and I won't be late, or maybe it'll be 6 or 7 minutes and I will likely be late. This is a great example, because for me, in the past, I would appraise that as, this is stressful. Not life-threatening, not career-ending, but stressful, because I have a past experience and lots of memories about, uh-oh, what are people going to think if I'm late? Are people going to think I'm unprofessional? I don't like being late. Are people, going to be judging me harshly for that? Okay, so it's stressful. And that response for me used to be pretty automatic. But here I am stuck behind the train, or stuck waiting for the train to cross. Nothing really I can do about it. Is it worth a stress response? Is it worth a stress response where I'm going to be anxious the whole time waiting for the train to get out of there, anxious the whole time I'm driving and parking and going in, anxiously running in and coming in, and what? Hopefully I'm lucky enough to be in a work environment where if I am a few minutes late, no one would notice or do anything other than say hi or be concerned. Nobody's going to be judging me harshly. And I'm really lucky that that is my work environment. Some people do have much more stressful work environments. But again, remember that all of this is inside of me right now. I'm the one that's navigating my own stress response. I can do that. I can go ahead and be stressed out over being late, go into the meeting, and that stress response is going to inform if I'm hearing, if I'm listening, what I say, how I feel about myself, my self-talk maybe for the rest of the morning. Or I can again just ask myself the question, okay, wait a minute, is this worth a stress response? No, not really. I don't like being 5 minutes late, and it's probably not going to ruin the whole day. What do I do instead? Okay, knowing that I'm starting to feel anxious about being late, let's take the 3 to 5 minutes that the train is there and use that as an invitation in my car to just breathe and do some relaxation breathing. Just take a moment, look around, look at the scenery, scan the body, be present in the body, do some deep breathing, manage that stress response that was starting to move within me, breathe, and remind myself of what I actually know is true, which is, yeah, okay, I'll be a minute or two late, and it'll be okay. The ceiling is not going to fall in on me. Okay, whatever worry or fear is probably not based in real evidence. Notice what I'm not doing though. I'm not beating myself up because there's a habituated stress response. It's how the mind, body, spirit works together. Notice I'm asking myself a question. I'm not criticizing myself or calling myself silly or hysterical for having a stress response. Nope, it's there and I want to deal with it with as much compassion as I can. But I also want to give myself a moment of choice and say, okay, is this worth the stress response that I'm about to have? Probably not. So if I do some relaxation breathing, I'll get there at the same time, but my whole frame of mind, my mood, how well I can listen, how well I can attend to others, the pace that I'm walking, and certainly my body are going to be in a very different place. By the way, here's what I mean specifically by relaxation response breathing. You've heard me mention that a lot. One of the things that happens when we are distressed is that we hyperventilate. And we also breathe much more shallowly. So we breathe faster and more shallowly. This is a response to try to get as much oxygen into the body for that fight, flight, or freeze as we can. But unless we are actually in a life-threatening situation, hyperventilating and breathing shallowly rather than sinking the breath into the belly and the diaphragm is not particularly helpful for us, and it will increase stress. So instead of breathing as we do if we are scared or startled, which is that response, okay, what we want to do is intentionally breathe as though we are in the midst of receiving the most relieving information that we can imagine. In other words, if the stress response is going to hijack our breathing into hyperventilation, oftentimes without us even noticing it, we want to gently hijack the brain back and help the whole body re-regulate by the breath. We can do more with a relaxing breath than we can with almost anything else, because the breath is so absolutely fundamental to being alive, right? So I'll exaggerate it a little bit so you can see, but what we want to do is breathe as though we have been waiting anxiously for news of something incredibly important, and the news is good. What do you instinctively do when that happens? You instinctively go like this. So what did I just do? I breathed in normally. Don't count the in-breath. I don't think that's particularly useful. I just breathed in, did not hold the breath. Please don't hold your breath. And breathed out longer than the in-breath. Okay. Can be helpful if you have your hands on your diaphragm so that you know you're kind of dropping the breath into the belly. And if that's hard to feel, the easiest way to feel that is lying flat on the floor or on the bed or on the couch, and you can feel your diaphragm raising and lowering. It won't be a lot, it'll be pretty subtle. But if you just imagine just breathing into your hands and sinking that breath into the body. So the first and probably best thing that any of us can do, if we note in our body, okay, a stress response is coming or is already here, is do some of those relaxation response breaths. Do that. So go ahead and try that right now. Try first the quick inhalation and the holding, or the hyperventilation. That doesn't feel good. We can actually induce a panic attack doing that if we wanted to. And now go ahead and try a relaxation breath. In for a count of 2 and out. And really just let that go. So pay attention to your breath. It often is the earliest cue that our stress level is changing. So be curious about, is whatever's happening right now, internally, externally, is it worth a stress response? Well, why? How does stress affect pain? Stress affects pain in a number of different ways. One of the obvious things that happens is we tense and brace and guard our muscles, both in response to pain, but also in response to stress. And so if we are already having pain in the body, and then we're stressed out and muscles are tensed, we're going to have increased pain. We also, one of the things that happens, so when we think about what we're talking about is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system here that responds to stress and can offer us the fight, flight, or freeze response. The freeze response is also a trauma response. It looks very different from either a flight or a fight response, but it's part of that whole system. So physiologically, what happens during a stress response is that all kinds of chemicals are released in the body. We've talked about that. Once we've appraised this is a stressor, or in the case of a close call, the appraisal is so fast we don't notice it. What happens is our heart beats faster, our lungs, we are breathing harder and faster to try to get as much blood and oxygen to the main organs of the body and the big muscles. So if we think about, heart and lungs, what happens though is that blood flow and oxygen flow to the periphery. So fingers, toes, changes. So the blood stays mostly in the core and the trunk and the big muscles, which is why many of us, if we are stressed out, will have cold or clammy or sweaty hands, or our whole body might be suddenly sweaty. There's also something about over-releasing of sweat in case we are trying to slip away from whatever is trying to grab us. The other thing that can happen, cortisol is one of the stress chemicals that is released during stress. And we'll talk a lot about cortisol and how it is helpful and how it is unhelpful. But again, what we were talking about a moment before is that one strong stress response that is then followed by a relaxation response or the parasympathetic response, our bodies are fairly well equipped to do that, okay? But if we are in persistent stress frequently, so that relaxation response is not allowed to be active or to be present for very long, we are going to increase hypersensitivity to pain. In other words, instead of the endogenous opioid system coming on board and reducing pain, or in some cases blocking it temporarily altogether, as it does with acute stress, we're actually going to have increased pain in response to stress. So let's take a moment right now and just pause this recording. What I'm curious about is the question of, what do you notice for yourself, your connection between stress and pain? What do you notice about that connection? Have you noticed a connection? And if so, what do you notice about it? There is a lot of scientific research that looks at the connection between persistent stress and persistent health conditions, including some models of pain. One of the best books that I can think of that talks about the stress response in mammals and the health effects of stress over time if we don't work with it is also one of the funniest books. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Sapolsky. As you can gather from the title, it's pretty humorous, but it's an excellent book from a scientific standpoint, but also in discussing in very clear terminology what the stress response is in the human body, why it's not helpful overall for long-term health and well-being, and why humans, because of the cognitive appraisal, are much more likely to have an overactive, overprotective stress response than other non-human animals, in this case, like zebras. So if we really think about, and if you've ever watched some of those videos where the gazelle or the antelope gets away from the lion or the predator animal, there are some of those videos online. Try to find the ones where the prey animal actually survives. But what we notice is, in a life-threatening situation, those prey animals have a fight, flight, or freeze response, usually a flight response, or they don't last very long. But if you watch those videos, almost inevitably what happens after that is that the animals are moving and shaking, okay, after that tremendous stressor. The shaking and the moving is thought to facilitate that parasympathetic nervous system, or the relaxation response. So in other words, in non-human animals, when there is actually a life-threatening stimuli, a life-threatening situation or predator, the stress response happens very quickly, and then it goes back to baseline so that they can continue eating or grazing. By the way, that's one of the other non-essential functions that goes offline during a stress response is digestion, okay? So some immune system functions, cell tissue healing and repair, digestion, all of those things slow down or in some cases stop. If you think about really severe anxiety or stress, if you've had that before, you might notice that you feel like you've been kicked in the stomach, there's a rock in your stomach. In some cases, if stress is significant enough, we might throw up, we might void bladder or bowels. All of that is about eliminating any non-essential function, including digestion or metabolism, in order to focus all of the body's available resources on fighting this, this life-threatening stimuli. But Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is a wonderful book because, again, it kind of humorously points out that because we have these very fine minds, we have the ability, unfortunately, to store a lot of memories and a lot of context and appraise things as stressful that non-human animals usually don't. There are other articles fairly recently, some of them are a little old, but that look at persistent pain as being directly connected to stress, stress being a risk factor for the onset of certain kinds of arthritis, and stress certainly increasing neuroinflammation, which in turn can cause hypersensitivity in body tissues and in the nerves. This is the cycle that we want to interrupt and work with and break up a bit if you are having it. And that is the stress, tension, pain cycle. So tension referring to musculoskeletal tension and guarding and bracing, which can happen for a number of reasons. It can happen because we've been in pain for a long time and we don't know another way to be. It can happen briefly in response to feeling as though we're going to fall. For people who are lucky enough not to have stress or persistent pain, the metaphor I like to use is, well, it's not a metaphor. The example I like to use is, you know, if you're wearing bad shoes in the winter and all of a sudden you realize you're walking on ice, how do you hold your body? You brace, you tense, you guard. Okay, but if you're like that all of the time, that is likely to increase pain. And the more pain increases, stress is also likely to increase. Pain, of course, if we look over here, can be physically and emotionally stressful. If you think about what it feels like to wake up in the morning and to be in pain, or to suddenly have pain come and not know what's happening, that can be appraised as being very stressful, and often is. And then we're going to tense up in response to pain. So this cycle can again become a closed feedback loop. What we want to do is begin trying to interrupt it, whether we are trying to physically interrupt the muscle tension, bracing, guarding with some of the relaxation response breathing that we did, some of the meditations that we did. Progressive muscle relaxation is fantastic for working with musculoskeletal tension and guarding. Even just body scanning and being aware of the tension level that we are in and working with that pretty continually. We hope that working with our stress response and working pretty diligently to interrupt, downregulate, or eliminate non-essential stress will reduce tension and will reduce pain. So we've been talking about this before, but the physical impact of the stress response, whether it is acute or ongoing, we've talked about the fact that heart rate goes way up, blood pressure goes up, blood flow changes. It moves from the periphery to the center, to the core, to the heart and lungs, the big muscles that are going to be helping us fight or flee. Rapid breathing we've talked about. Increased musculoskeletal tension and guarding, which if you already have musculoskeletal tension, pain, discomfort, is not helpful. Increased arousal. So the fight or flight centers of the brain, the limbic brain, the amygdala and the hippocampus, which store emotional memories connected to threat, connected to fear, connected to terror. All of those centers become active and we become more vigilant on a mental focus on danger and a mental focus on escaping that danger. In other words, we're much more likely to overperceive things that are neutral or helpful as being threatening based on the stress response. And we are not likely to be able to creatively, calmly solve problems. And again, this is how our brains have evolved. Our brains have evolved over time, where we started out first with the brain stem, the life-sustaining functions of, breathing, heart rate, etc. And over time, the other structures, including the limbic brain, which is the more kind of primitive reptilian brain that is interested in fight, flight, freeze kinds of functions, sensory information. And then finally, the last parts of our brain to evolve and the last parts of our brain to develop in utero, by the way, and the last part of the brain to develop in our early 20s or to be fully myelinated is this frontal lobe that we would associate with executive functioning. So this frontal lobe is able to be more planful, more thoughtful, more creative about problem solving, more curious about whether or not something is actually threatening. Did the coworker look at me funny, or is that because I'm already late and stressed out and I'm over vigilant and I'm seeing that where it doesn't exist? Be aware what happens in a stress response, whether it is short-term or long-term, is that more than likely the frontal lobe is not the one in charge. More than likely the limbic brain, the fight, flight, or freeze centers are going to be overactive, okay? Why does that matter? Because if we are in a state of arousal, activation, fight, flight, freeze, and stress, first of all, it's likely that pain is higher. Second of all, we're not going to be able to use our so-called logical mind. So if we're actually in a stress response, what doesn't work is somebody telling us, relax, don't be stressed out. That doesn't work. We're not able to do that. It also doesn't help to tell ourselves, oh my gosh, I'm losing it. I can't do anything right. We're in a stress response. This part of the fight, flight, or freeze center is really in charge, not the calmer, logical, rational brain. So what we want to do is help ourselves ground, breathe, use some relaxation response breathing, use some grounding maybe using the five senses, some pleasant smells, some breathing, some music, some movement if we need to do that, in order to help the stress response go down so that we once again have access to these executive functions of the brain. For people who are in a pretty perpetual fight, flight, or freeze state, people who have an acute stress disorder all the way up to post-traumatic stress, what we talk about a lot is that, you know, the analogy here is the horse and the rider. If you're a human and you're riding a horse, first of all, good for you, that's great. Horses are wonderful, and I can't imagine a more enjoyable thing to do in Montana in the springtime other than kayaking. Second of all, physically, how much power and control does the human rider have over a fully grown adult horse? Some, you know, there's the bridle, there's the reins, there's the saddle, if you're doing that. Some control, and if the horse is walking along and things are peaceful, we might feel as though we majestic humans have a lot of control over this big, beautiful, gorgeous horse. What if, however, a gunshot goes off or something startles and that horse bolts? How much control do we have then? In some cases, we're really along for the ride. We are really, in my experience, we're holding on for dear life and trying not to fall off until the horse either runs to a point where they stop or we can slow them down, and that may take a little bit of time. So in the case of the stress response and our brain, the frontal lobe, this nice, rational, calm, methodical, planful, peaceful part of our brain, is the human rider. Fight, flight, or freeze center of the middle of my brain, as I'm pointing somewhere under my hair, is that horse. If this is startled and activated, trying to manage it with this is not going to work. It's not going to work. So in the case of a stress response that has run away with us, what we need to do is not chastise ourselves, shame ourselves, tell ourselves that we're just not handling things well, why can't I do this, etc. None of that is helpful. What we want to do is help slow the horse down. We want to manage and interrupt and slow down our own stress response as compassionately as we can. Okay. So the mental focus on danger, the mental focus on escape. We've talked before that the digestive system will be interrupted or in some cases just stopped, which is really unpleasant, especially if we already are having trouble with digestion. By the way, our GI system, stomach, intestines, is absolutely rich with so-called neurotransmitters. So what we would normally consider neurotransmitters that are associated with mood, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. We have many, 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 many of those receptors all over our body, and particularly in the lining of our stomach. And isn't it so interesting that our language, in English at least, reflects this knowledge? We have figures of speech that we use, like I'm heartbroken, or that was a kick in the gut, or gosh, that was a punch in the gut, or I have a gut instinct about that. Why do we say that? Well, because the mind and the body and the spirit are all connected, and we know that. And the body can give us such hugely important information about how we're traveling through the world and which part of the brain seems to be in charge at the moment. So if you know that your brain is a runaway horse right now, don't try to use logic. Just help slow the runaway horse down, take care of the runaway horse, and breathe, and then you'll have access to your frontal lobe again, I promise. Okay, the effects of chronic stress over time: persistent muscle tension, just persistent musculoskeletal tension, which can lead to muscle spasms, which are really unpleasant. interrupted or poor oxygen to tissues, which is really important for just overall health and well-being. It's also really helpful if there are circulatory issues, or if you've had a recent injury or something has happened where you need good blood flow to all of your tissues to be healthy. What happens emotionally for us? What happens emotionally for us, or in our relationships, or even in our workplace, if our focus is persistently on possible threat in our environment or possible escape? And that doesn't have to be literal, like you're literally afraid your life is going to be threatened at work. It can look more like, what happens if my focus is on danger or threat or escape? Let's go back to my example of I've come in late and I'm really worried about it. I had the stress response over it. I came in late, I hid in the back of the room, I went to my office. Now, what happens if my supervisor waves at me and says, "Can you come into my office and see me on your way out?" Now, if I'm not in a stress response, I hopefully won't assign a lot of stressful meaning to that. I'll hopefully just say, yep, sure, I'll go in and I'll catch you on my way out. But if I'm here, if my focus is on danger, threat, escape, and then the boss or whoever says, you need to stop by my office before you go, what's the likelihood that I'm going to assign a bunch of really stressful meaning making and story to, what could that be about? And why am I having to wait till the end of the day? What's going on? Is this bad news? Okay. Now, if I do that once in a while, it can be hard on me. If I do it all the time, I am going to be in a stress heightened state really regularly, right? Really regularly. And it's not necessarily helpful. A stress response is there to help us with a short-term, possibly life-threatening event. It gives us mind, body, spirit, what we need to marshal ourselves and meet the challenges of that event, and then it's supposed to back down, right? Ideally. Also leads to just a persistent feeling of constantly anxious, constantly worried about everything having a negative outcome, okay? Higher blood pressure, which is not helpful for us physically. Increased risk of stroke, increased risk of heart disease and heart attack. By the way, health psychology has studied cardiac risk and emotion and mood for many years, and looking for correlations, not causality, but correlation. You've probably heard people say correlation is not causality. But what are the moods and emotions associated with an increased risk of heart disease and heart attack? Stress. There's actually some really fascinating new research about stress chemicals and cardiac risk, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the mood that is most associated, or the emotion that is most associated with an increased risk of heart disease and heart attack, is hostility. Hostility. So that mix of anger, impatience, contempt, dislike, loathing, dare I say, hostility toward others, systems, and towards oneself. Hostility is the mood state most consistently associated with a risk of heart disease and heart attack. Okay. Increased risk of diabetes, or diabetes management being challenging. In other words, blood sugar fluctuating more than what we would expect with stress. Some of these are primary mechanisms, so how the chemicals affect the body. Some of these are secondary mechanisms, or what happens to my regular self-care if I am in a stress state, right? If I am not in a stress state, hopefully I'm going to be much more likely to do the regular health behaviors that are associated with good short and long-term health, such as getting decent sleep. We're going to have a whole unit on sleep. Being able to go to sleep and wake up and feel pretty good. Movement, in other words, exercise, hopefully taking medications, vitamins, and supplements as needed, going to doctors, psychologists, counselors, physical therapists, dentists consistently, caring for myself. All of those health behaviors can be connected to our current stress level. What can happen if we perceive that our stress level is very high, we don't have much time? What is likely to be eliminated from our week? Could it be our self-care? Going back to my meditation teacher, when I announced, there's no way I have 20 minutes in the morning to meditate. And the response was, excellent. So go ahead and double that. It's so incredibly important to look at our own self-care as what it is, which is absolutely essential. But it can be one of the first things that gets cut if we are focused on danger, escape, threat, having to take care of everyone else rather than ourselves. Okay. Peripheral neuropathy. So neuropathy in the periphery, the hands, the arms, the feet, the legs. Okay. Stress can make that worse. Conditions, health conditions that are related to stress, either with onset or exacerbation or a worsening of this condition. Notice I did not say stress causes all these things. It's not ever probably going to be that simple or that clear. It's almost always going to be multifactorial. But stress has been linked to onset or worsening of health conditions, including musculoskeletal conditions like arthritis and fibromyalgia, including GI conditions like IBS, like ulcers. Now, interestingly, of course, they found 25 years ago that yes, although an ulcer in the lining of the stomach could be made worse by stress and other sympathomimetics. A sympathomimetic is any substance or chemical that mimics the action of the sympathetic nervous system or the fight, flight, or freeze system. My favorite sympathomimetic is coffee. Anyway, so caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol are all really salient to whether or not we are developing ulcers, and stress can be part of that. But then, of course, they found out that bacteria, H. pylori bacteria specifically, was also maintaining those ulcers being open. So they began treating ulcers with antibiotic medication to take out the H. pylori and rebalance that, along with saying, by the way, high stress, caffeine, alcohol, nicotine are all really hard on the lining of the GI tract. Okay. Dermatological conditions like increased psoriasis or eczema, respiratory conditions such as asthma can be worsened by stress, okay? Cardiovascular conditions like heart disease, we'll talk about cardiac risk and stress again because there's newer research and it's really important. Endocrine conditions such as diabetes and some fertility concerns. Cognitive concerns such as difficulty with memory and concentration. It's not uncommon for someone to come into me, and if I ask any changes in your short-term memory or your concentration in the last few months or so, and they will say yes, and it worries me. You know, there's a history of dementia in my family. I'm really worried about it. What I try to do first is ask them about two things. Number one, how much sleep they're getting. Our cognitive ability is deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected to our sleep, period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And what's the stress level? Because again, if you think about if we're in a persistent stress state, we are usually not pretty well anchored in the frontal lobe function of concentration, planning, thinking, remembering what we need at the grocery store. If we are back here or going back here pretty regularly, concentration and cognition overall is going to be pretty spotty. If you think about one of the last times that you had a loved one with an injury or a serious illness and your focus was there, it likely was not in your immediate short-term memory, and you might have tried to read or tried to listen to what somebody was saying and noticed that it had to be repeated 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So one of the first things that I always ask folks is, how's your sleep? How's your stress level? Both of those things impact cognition significantly. And psychological states such as anxiety and depression, okay? A prolonged stress response over time will at some point cause fatigue and exhaustion. The mind, body, spirit can't maintain anxiety 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We are going to at some point have exhaustion. And sometimes that exhaustion can look a lot like clinical depression. Okay. So I told you before, there's newer research and newer information out on cardiac risk and the stress response. So I'm going to bring out the work of Kelly McGonigal, PhD. Her book is called The Upside of Stress. She also has a TED Talk that is fantastic. So before Kelly McGonigal's work, which fortunately is pretty recent, people like me, so people in the field of psychology or health psychology or working in medicine, would really have a lot of alarming things to say about unmanaged, uncontrolled stress response. Stress response that's not managed is really bad for your health. Well, isn't that kind of stressful to hear if, first of all, you're struggling with your health and you have a lot of stressors in your life that you don't feel like you can easily interrupt, control, stop, or manage, and now somebody's telling you that even your stress response is bad for you? That's going to increase your stress response, right? But what if it's more complicated and more nuanced than that? What if, again, the power of our appraisal, how we appraise what our own stress response means, can change how our body experiences it? And I'm paraphrasing McGonigal's work here. I really encourage you to read her book, or I encourage you to look at her TED Talk, and I'll have a link coming up. So just as our appraisal about whether or not, is this really worth a stress response? Even asking that question can create a pause, a slowing down of what we normally perceive as an automatic function. And so we begin to have a choice point in there. Is this worth a stress response? Yep, sure is. Is this worth a stress response? I don't know, but I'm already having it, so now I need to deal with that. Is it worth a stress response? No, I'm going to breathe. That is fantastic work. Okay, but what if the story that we tell ourselves about our stress or our pain can change how our body responds to it? So McGonigal's work looked specifically at cardiac risk factors based on our stress response, but also our appraisal of our stress response. And here's what the research showed. If we view our stress response as bad, scary, unhelpful, dangerous, guess what? Blood vessels will in fact constrict. And we don't want constriction of blood vessels. We don't want that usually, okay? It's a cardiac risk factor, right? However, if we view our stress response as exactly what it is, wow, I'm having a stress response. This is the mind-body connection. These are the geniuses in my brain that are getting me ready to handle this situation, this stressor. This is an adaptive output of my brain. If we appraise it that way and understand that that is what is going on, our blood vessels stay relaxed. They don't constrict. So cardiac risk factors, in fact, how often the blood vessels constrict in response to stress, change based on the appraisal of our stress response. It might be a bit confusing because I've just talked with you about asking ourselves, first of all, scanning ourselves for stress and asking ourselves questions about, is this worth a stress response? And if we're having one, how we think about it and how we appraise it really, really matters. So I'm saying both things. It's not going to be possible to eliminate every stress response, although I do think asking ourselves, Is this particular situation worth one? Nope, not really. Cool. We can move on with our day. If we're having one, or if the answer is, yep, it is worth a stress response, the story that we tell ourselves about that matters. It matters for our cardiac health, but it also matters about our appraisal of ourselves. Whether or not we see ourselves as, I'm not handling my stress very well and I'm always stressed out, sounds pretty negative, versus, yep, I'm having a stress response and my mind-body system is really active in helping me conquer whatever this is. Great. That matters. It matters, first of all, for how we see ourselves, but interestingly enough, it matters for our cardiac health. How does it matter? Oxytocin. I love to talk about oxytocin, but more than that, I love showing pictures of these dogs because, my gosh, I mean, look at their faces. You have an instant, hopefully, if you're me, you have an instant flood of oxytocin and feel-good chemicals at seeing these fuzzy dog faces. We associate oxytocin with attachment, the love chemical. It is colloquially, it is known as. So the chemical of attachment, we release oxytocin when we see someone we love, yes, including dogs. By the way, fun fact about dogs, among many fun facts that we could talk about today, but fun facts about dogs. So when we come home and they greet us and they're wagging at us and we see these wonderful faces, we release oxytocin, we feel great. Guess what? So do they. When dogs see us and they're wagging and they're play bowing and they're doing that, they're also releasing oxytocin. Pretty great. But who cares? How is that related to stress and pain? Because oxytocin is also released during a stress response. We talked about cortisol and how over-release of cortisol can be connected to inflammation that is not helpful. But oxytocin is also released during a stress response. Why would that be? Why would that be? Because if oxytocin is a chemical that is about attachment, I am in a state of stress, I'm looking around for someone to offer some sort of help or support, that is a chemical connection for resources, right? We feel better when we reach out and connect to others, when we are hurting emotionally, physically, when we are distressed. So I find it fascinating that oxytocin is released during stress because that's going to make us much more likely to reach out and connect with others for help and support. Or it will make us likely to hug our cats, our dogs, our lizards. I'm not sure if lizards release oxytocin when they see us. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else can Google that and knows. So how we think about our own stress response, if we're going to have one, the horse has run away with the brain, the rider is along for the ride. How we think about that stress response really matters. My stress response now is dangerous and bad for me on top of everything else. Our body will follow that or try to. Versus this is my mind-body connection and millions of years of evolution rising to help me meet this challenge. Our body will follow us there. So in other words, if I break it down really quickly and really simply, if you're having a stress response, don't stress out about it. Notice it, breathe, understand what it is, help the horse slow down so that the rider can once again be in charge. Self-compassion is really the key here, but also knowing the science behind what goes on in our mind-body when we're having stress. So the biological stress response through oxytocin is really pushing us to connect with other people, to also have empathy and caring for others, and tell other people how we feel. These things are connected to what we call resilience. There is a tremendous amount of research that shows us time after time after time, and also lived experience, that talking with caring, concerned others about our pain, emotional pain, physical pain, grief, loss, doesn't matter. Talking about someone who cares about us makes us feel better. Not talking about it at all tends to not help us, or talking about it with somebody who is not sympathetic, who is critical, who's not listening, who seems uncaring, or even seems punitive or harsh. Not surprisingly, we're physically going to feel worse. We're physically going to feel worse. So oxytocin being released pushes us to reaching out to connect with others. It pushes us to pick up the phone and call a friend, or to get on the Zoom and talk with somebody, or to hug the dog, or sometimes we just need a hug. That's that oxytocin response, right? Oxytocin is also anti-inflammatory. So along with being the chemical connected to attachment and love, oxytocin relaxes blood vessels during stress. That's a good thing. Interestingly enough, again, this is the wonderful work of Kelly McGonigal. It helps heart cells or cardiac cells heal and regenerate if there is any stress-induced damage. So if that stress response is coming and there is damage to cardiac cells or blood vessel constriction, oxytocin will help heal those things. And again, I have to just step back and marvel at the genius of our bodies, right? Kelly McGonigal's TED Talk came out 2013, How to Make Stress Your Friend, and we've already mentioned her book. So thanks very much for her fine work in that. So how then do we interrupt and manage and work with our stress response? First of all, what we did at the start of today. Stress awareness, first of all, body scanning and being mindfully aware of mentally, physically, what happens for us when we're stressed, so that we know the signs and that we know what's happening. Physical activity, physical exercise in particular, is one of the best methods of preventing, coping with, and dealing with the byproducts of stress. In other words, burning off all of those stress chemicals. This can be really challenging for people with pain. A lot of people have told me that exercise has been the main way that they've burned off their stress and coped with stress. And if pain is limiting or preventing that physical exercise ability, then all of a sudden stress is higher anyway and pain gets worse. That can be a situation that, again, somebody is going to want help and support with. Having our goals, our goal setting, and our action plans really be very much about our values and our wants and needs rather than what others expect of us. The example that we talked about previously was the person who was going to plan this very, very large holiday meal and was really stressed out about it and miserable even thinking about how much stress and pain it was going to cause. And it turns out that the values underneath that that whole complex holiday meal was really about, I want time with loved ones and I want yummy food. And so if those are the values, how to then shift the action plans and the goal setting around getting those two values connected and met, rather than I have to do this very complicated meal preparation and planning and holiday cleanup, and I'm not really going to enjoy it. Okay. Shifting and persisting, being aware that the stress response is something our body does. It does in response to that stress appraisal. And if we're having a stress response, not being stressed out about it. And persisting with whatever it is that we're doing. Neurophysiological quieting. So all of the mindfulness meditation, guided imagery meditation, breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, Tai Chi, Qigong, all of those things are considered neurophysiological quieting practices. We're going to talk a bunch about that coming up. Time management, I think of it more as time rearrangement. We talked before about self-care. And we talked about how tempting it is to habituate to where our own self-care, eating, sleeping, recreation, solitary time, creative time, play time, mindfulness meditation time, fun time, all of those self-care pieces, movement, if I didn't say that, are oftentimes the first ones to get eliminated or shortened if we feel like we have to focus on taking care of everyone else, okay? And yet, if we don't do those regular self-care practices, stress gets worse, everything tends to get worse until what happens? Usually we collapse until we're either so exhausted or we're ill, and then we're forced to take care of ourselves, or we have increased stress until we recognize it and then start working with our own self-care. So what about this? What if our own self-care, whatever that looked like, was put into our schedule first before we scheduled everything for everyone else? Let me say that again. What if you took your day planner? Here's mine. Yes, I like the pen and paper one, not the screen one. What if in your day planner, the first things that you scheduled for your week or your month were your self-care activities? And what if you actually wrote out an appointment and scheduled it with yourself? Walk with a friend, walk the dog, cooking a fun meal, maybe even with some friends now, if we have it outside. Going to the gym if we're doing that. Meditation for 20 minutes. Sitting outside in nature, sitting outside and looking at the view, being in the garden. All of those things that are self-care for you. We're talking again too about your Sims. What if you put those into your schedule first before appointments or obligations to others, right? And then make the appointment to yourself and then actually keep it. Because chances are, I may not have met you yet, but chances are you are somebody that if you make an appointment or an obligation to somebody else, you'll keep it. You'll be really diligent about that. What about your appointments with yourself? It's a really hard practice to do, and I will tell you that I was first introduced to this idea by a supervisor in school, where again, in grad school, my continual daily story was, I don't have time. I don't have time for any of this. I can't do this. I don't have any time. Well, how long does the schedule hold together if we don't take time for self-care? Not very well. But here's the secret to a busy schedule. And realistically, if you are working in or outside of the home, if you're volunteering, if you're caring for children, for parents, for loved ones, if energy is low, if pain is high, okay, how then do you schedule your self-care first without feeling really overwhelmed and really hopeless about it? Because I know it's not realistic to say you're going to spend an hour a day peacefully meditating in a forest, and then you're going to be doing art, and then you're going to be doing movement, and you're going to be sleeping for 8 or 9 hours a day. That would be lovely, and if you can do that, by the way, I really encourage you to do that. But it's also not realistic. And again, when we're setting goals for ourselves, we want to set ourselves up to succeed, not to fail. So self-care in 5-minute increments. 5-minute increments. You can do a tremendous amount of good for yourself, mentally, physically, spiritually, if you begin introducing self-care in 5 minutes. Most of us, if not all of us, even busy students or busy people, can find 5 minutes to take a quick 5-minute walk, do a 5-minute breathing exercise while you're stuck in your car, or waiting in line at the grocery store, or in the waiting room if you have a medical appointment. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of breathing, 5 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of movement, 5 minutes of something that makes you laugh, 5 minutes of outside, 5 minutes to scan your body, have some water, just check in with your tension. 5-minute increments. So try that. That's my invitation to you, is to add in 5 minutes of self-care. See how that goes. See what that's like, first of all, to be able to do. Hopefully it will feel doable, and you make that habitual for a couple of weeks. Then, and only then, if you want to add more, go ahead and do that. Go ahead and double it up to 10 minutes. Okay. Self-compassion. None of what we're talking about goes very well or is easy if it comes from a place of self-criticism, shaming. I should do this. Why can't I do this? I know better than this. I'm not doing very well. To hear all of those judgmental attitudes. I'm stressed out again, and she told me to ask myself, is this worth a stress response? And I can't stop stressing. I'm not coping very well, right? Self-compassion, self-compassion, self-compassion. Again, as we talked about, my relationship with myself and how I treat myself is the relationship that I can control, okay, amongst all of the people in the world, in my life. Now, it's easier for my self-talk and my inner narrative to be really affirming and really supportive when things are going well for me. Yeah, look, I'm on time. I did my meditation. I have hydrated. I'm doing well at this life thing. Good for me. Where it's more important, believe it or not, is when we really don't feel that we've got it together or that we're doing well. Or if we feel like we're struggling, we're not handling our stress the way we would wish. Maybe we didn't have the interaction with family members that we had hoped to. We were snappy, we were short-tempered, we couldn't handle anything, and so we disconnected and we isolated for a day. We made mistakes. All of those things, that is the time where self-compassion is tremendously important, even more so. Here's why. Adding self-criticism, guilt, or shame on top of stress, pain, and trying to cope with it never helps. Never, ever, ever helps. So one thing that can be helpful is to remind ourselves of what is true. Probably, more often than not, what is true in the moment, even when we feel like we've tripped and fallen flat on our face, is, I'm having a hard time right now. True? Probably true. Notice I said right now, the power of right now. I'm having a hard time right now. Hopefully it won't always be that way. I'm having a hard time right now, and I'm doing the best I can. Isn't that usually almost always the truth? That in the moment, even in the moment of the stress response, even in the moment of, uh-oh, things are falling apart around me, are we not still doing the best that we can in that moment? Yeah, it probably doesn't look or feel how we wish it would. We wish that we would be coping differently, but it doesn't matter. In that moment, we're having a hard time, and we're doing the best that we can in that moment. There will be another moment where we will be able to breathe. We'll be able to slow the running horse down. We'll be able to think again, reach out and reconnect, fix the mistake, apologize, be gentle to ourselves, okay? But if we're not doing that from a self-compassionate stance, we're making everything harder and tougher for ourselves. And by the way, self-compassion, relationship with oneself, oftentimes those are part of really good long-term therapeutic work. If you have your own counselor or psychologist, hopefully you're talking about this, and hopefully that relationship is all about learning self-compassion, gentleness for oneself. Because a lot of people did not grow up learning about self-compassion or hearing that reflected from important others. And it's not necessarily something that we're born knowing. We learn it from others. And so if we didn't learn it in early years, if it's not something we're learning at home right now or in the workplace right now, there are other places to learn true self-compassion. True self-compassion and self-care, by the way, is hard. It's hard because it means really deeply connecting with the present moment experience of what is actually going on. But remember, our relationship with ourselves is the one that we have the most impact on, and it can be supportive and kind and compassionate and caring, or it can be toxic, it can be unkind, it can in some cases even be abusive. I was really startled and thought, wow, at a patient that came in that realized, because I had invited to track kind of just that inner self-talk for a little while and let me know what they found out. And what they came in and said was, I realized something big. I love hearing that. Tell me, what? I realized I'm in an abusive relationship with myself. Wow. Okay. So in that realization can be a whole lot of different opportunities, openings, learnings, grieving, healing, and then the invitation for self-compassion. So self-compassion, okay, and how we talk to ourselves. So for actual stress management strategies, mindful self-monitoring. In other words, body scanning and checking in with ourselves every day, either formally or informally, to see what is happening with our bodies and how much stress we are navigating. And this can just be mindfulness in everyday life. In other words, tuning into SIMS, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what you smell, what you taste right now. We did a little bit of that today. Can be very helpful for checking in with ourselves. Hopefully we're also observing muscle tension changes, our changes in mood, and our thinking patterns. One of the main tools that can be really helpful is the current stressors list in this book on page 243. So if you have the current stressors list, and if not, you can pause and pull that up. But it can be helpful, if a little intimidating sometimes, to list all of the stressors. So it's just a big blank page that you can write down any possible stressors, including family, work, unemployment, disability, health issues for yourself, for your family, finances, relationships with friends, neighbors, etc., transportation, politics, government, religion, etc. Write it all down. And then it wants to ask you how you're coping with it, what your coping strategies are for that. And we'll talk more about that too. This is a good time to pull out this Pain Truth handout that is also hopefully in your appendix, because what it asks you to do is go through and tabulate your danger score. Each one of these has a scale from 0 to 10. 0 is no difficulty, and 10 is severe difficulty with whatever the category is. And it will have you go through and tabulate all of these stressors. So let's just do this. If you have this handout, I would invite you to go through it now and fill it out with me. First one is pain stress. 0 is you have full control over your pain, it's manageable and mild. Chances are, if that was the case, you would not be watching this program. But it may be the case. Maybe you're watching this program to try to understand or help a family member who has pain. 10 is you feel like you have no control over your pain, it's unpredictable, constant, and severe. So go ahead and rate pain stress. Next is work stress, which can be you don't have stressful work at all, or your work is very stressful, or you don't have work. So from 0 to 10, go ahead and rate your work stress. Family stress, 0 to 10. Okay. And family, is described very broadly as spouse, parents, kids, in-laws. Okay. Friends or social stress, again, 0 to 10. You have a great social life and close friends that you see and get along with, or you're mostly alone and don't have friends, or you have conflict with friends. Okay. And anything in between. I suspect a lot of us will be somewhere in between. Financial stress, again, 0 to 10. Insurance or legal issue stress, pending legal issues or insurance issues, 0 to 10. Fear of not recovering from pain or injury. 0 is you're 100% hopeful and optimistic of recovery. 10 is you're extremely fearful and worried that you're never going to get better. So go ahead and rate yourself there. Low mood or sadness, again, 0 to 10. You rarely feel sad or down, or you have in fact been diagnosed with depression and feel that it's not very well controlled. Worry over x-rays or MRIs, 0 to 10. Again, remember we've talked about before, Laura Mermosley's research, that even getting an MRI on a body part can increase pain and discomfort in that body part before we know what the results are. It's very interesting to me. And then any other health problems other than pain, 0 to 10. So you add these up, you get your danger score. Now let's look at the safety score. In other words, all of the things that are going well, that are protective for you, that you are doing that are helpful for you. Current level of physical activity, again, 0 to 10. 0 is not doing anything, basically lying down all day. 10 is you do up to an hour of mild to moderate activity like walking, gardening, swimming, yoga. Okay. Level of family support, again, 0 to 10. And of course, financial, logistical, emotional support. Job, employer, coworker satisfaction, 0 to 10. If you're retired and you're really great with that, great. Quality of your food habits, your diet, your smoking or alcohol habits. So 0 would be you skip meals or eat processed food every meal, smoke and regularly drink more than 3 drinks a day. And 10, you're eating fruits and vegetables, don't smoke, and occasionally have alcohol. So somewhere 0 to 10, go ahead and rate yourself on that. Satisfaction with healthcare providers, again, 0 to 10. 0 being extremely unhappy, 10 being really, really happy. Time spent outdoors in nature, again, 0 to 10. And it doesn't define how the time is spent. On the water, in the woods, hiking, camping, sitting, observing, doesn't define that, okay? Just time spent outside in nature. Boy, are we lucky when we're living in Montana that we can do that. Practicing relaxation and mindfulness, again, 0 to 10. Ideally, we are spending up to an hour a day intentionally breathing, meditating, relaxing, or engaged in mindful grounding activity. But again, remember what I said with 5 minutes. Quality and quantity of sleep. This is important enough that it will be the subject of our next talk. So 0 to 10, again, we need much more sleep usually than we're getting, is the good rule of thumb. Detailed life goals and plans set, again, 0 to 10. And having life goals and plans and feeling as though we can achieve those is really important for humans, for sure. And then it ends with the current level of fun in your life. 0 is you don't put any time aside for fun, and there's nothing, frankly, that feels fun or enjoyable anymore. And then 10, you're consciously doing at least 30 minutes to an hour of things that are fun every day. So you go ahead and add these scores up. Part of it is to be aware of the stress load that you're carrying. Part of it is to also be aware of the resilience load that you're carrying. In other words, the things that are going well that you're doing that are helping you. What I like to do with this handout is use it for functional goal setting. You can either look at, is there anything on the D side that we want less of? We want less work stress. We want less pain stress. We want less friend stress, for example. And is there anything on the safety side of things that we want more of? We want to increase the level of fun. We want to increase the level of mindfulness activity, okay? So when you choose the goal, and I'm looking on page 8, it's likely that the stresses are increasing the D score or the danger score and might be contributing overall to that overprotective central nervous system. And we just go ahead and jot those down. And then it has a page where you can write anything that you want about the current stresses. And what I love about it is that it says, just acknowledge it. This is not to share with anybody else. This is certainly not homework for me. This is not about fixing or solving anything. It's just about acknowledging it. We do a lot better when we name what we're actually grappling with and struggling with, and when we can see it, and then moving on. And then we look at, on page 9, we acknowledge that the S score, or the safety score, will increase when we focus on improving the following things: sleep, fun, time outdoors and nature, right? So then what we want to do is pick 3 functional activities in this handout, 3 physical activity goals that you wish to achieve within the next few months. And this can be a 5-minute walk with a dog or a friend, 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation, or we can simply say we're going to do review our Sims every day, okay? So if setting goals for you is helpful, I encourage you to do this. If it feels stressful, burdensome, you start to feel worried or guilty about not doing it, in other words, if it's a dim, please don't do it. And we've talked a lot about shifting our goal setting and our action planning to be reflective of our values rather than reflective of what other people want for us, or having pain dictate what we will and won't do in our life, and then experiencing the stress from that. And here is a little bit of information when we are setting goals. SMART goals stand specifically for the acronym of, we want the goal to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, or it can stand for reward, and we want it to be timely. So an example of a goal that would not be a SMART goal is if I say, I want to get into shape. I have a shape. I've already done that. Good for me. What do I mean when I say I want to be able to get into shape? Well, how about I would like to be able to run/walk a 5K in a year, in 12 months. I'm much more specific about what I'm doing. Why do I want to do it? Because it's always been a goal. I think it would be fun. It's a distance that is a bit of a push. That's my goal, because I want to do the river run 5K. Great. How am I going to get there? I'm going to start by, figuring out how long that would take to do. I'm going to start by getting good shoes. I'm going to start by having monthly goals. Okay. Is it measurable? Well, it's measurable if I do the 5K or not, but I also want to have pieces of that goal that are structured where I'm measuring it and I'm therefore managing it. Is it attainable? Yeah, hopefully so. If I hadn't done a 5K ever before and I said, I want to do one next week, that might be more of a challenge. I might be setting myself up to fail. Or if I said, I want to be able to run a marathon next month. So sometimes what makes a goal not doable is that we've shortened the timeline too much. Is it realistic? Yes, I think so. What is the reward for doing it? I get bragging rights to tell everybody, hey, I did a 5K. Hopefully also the training process is enjoyable and I feel better doing that. And if that doesn't work, then I usually do something like, and I'm going to schedule an hour-long massage. And is it timely? Well, if I actually find a 5K that occurs in a year and sign up for it, that will give me a pretty clear starting and stopping point. So that's an example of taking a very general goal of I want to get into shape and changing it to a year from now, I would like to be exercising 3 to 5 days a week such that I am able to run/walk a 5K and have that be doable for me. Okay. So if we're going to set goals, we do better with specific, measurable, realistic goals that, by the way, are enjoyable for us. If the goal has any kind of language in it, like, well, I should get up every day and exercise. Nope. Find a goal that actually speaks to you, that is meaningful to you, that actually has some heart and soul into it. It's a big difference with how we're likely to do motivation-wise and how enjoyable the process will be if, for example, the desired outcome is stopping smoking. If I wanted to do that, I should stop smoking because my doctor tells me I should, and my spouse has been nagging me. How likely am I going to be motivated to achieve and maintain that goal? Is it going to be pleasant for me? If I don't do very well, am I going to feel guilty? Am I going to feel ashamed? I might even avoid going back into the doctor because I just don't want to hear about it. Okay. Versus I'm going to stop smoking because I want to be around to see my grandkids graduate. That's a different goal, right? So if goal setting is connected to values, to heart and soul, to things that are important and meaningful for you, awesome, do it. And just break them down so that they're specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and that there's a time span with it, okay? And it may be much longer than the time span of understanding pain. We talked before a lot about the benefits of neurophysiological quieting. In other words, breathing, the relaxation breathing that we did, paying attention to the breath, mindfulness meditation where we are noticing the breath, passive muscle relaxation, which can be really hard to do, progressive muscle relaxation, which is where we intentionally tense and relax every major muscle group in the body to evoke a relaxation response. Progressive stretching relaxation, where we're tensing, relaxing, stretching. Guided mental imagery, which can be incredibly helpful. Self-hypnosis, which, by the way, we're giving ourselves self-hypnotic suggestion and self-hypnotic induction all of the time. It sounds something like this. Ugh, I'm late again. I'm such a screw up. Everybody's going to think I'm an unprofessional jerk. That's a self-hypnotic induction. Or, okay, I'm going to be late to the meeting. I'm having a hard time this morning, and I'm still doing the best I can. All of that is self-hypnotic induction, and the mind, body, spirit responds to that. So notice the self-talk and be curious about what kind of a relationship that we're having with ourselves. Would we talk to our child or our best friend or our spouse the way we talk to ourselves? And then a meditation practice that we begin to do. Some of the benefits of a quieting practice, particularly mindfulness meditation. Improved management of diabetes. I'm working from the bottom up. In other words, blood sugar is easier to regulate. Lower cholesterol and reduced risk of heart disease and heart attack with mindfulness meditation and other quieting practices. Yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, okay? Lowered blood pressure and a lowered risk of stroke. Reduced anger and irritability. And remember, we talked about consistent irritability, hostility, and the cardiac risk there. Reduced anxiety. Here's a pretty wonderful study that involved Jon Kabat-Zinn. You may have heard of him before, kind of a Western guru of mindfulness in the United States. In 1995, They did a study on mindfulness meditation-based stress reduction interventions in anxiety treatment and found out, sure enough, mindfulness meditation is able to reduce the experience of anxiety and the experience of pain. What does that mean? It doesn't get rid of anxiety and pain. What it does is it allows us to deal with it more easily, with less reactivity, less attachment, more space, improved sleep, better sleep, decreased muscle spasms, and decreased pain. A number of different studies. I've pulled just a few from the journal of, from JAMA and from the Journal of Neuroscience and the systemic review and meta-analysis there from JAMA. So brain mechanisms that support the modulation of pain with mindfulness meditation. Notice it's modulation of pain. It's not magical erasure of pain, but it is being able to observe noxious stimuli, anxiety, irritability, stress, all of those thoughts and experiences, pain, to be able to observe them with less reactivity, okay, will decrease the discomfort and the suffering from pain. So imagine if there was a drug or a shot that could decrease pain, decrease muscle spasm, improve your sleep, reduce your anxiety, your anger, your irritability, lower your blood pressure and your risk of stroke, heart attack, high cholesterol, and improve diabetes management. People would be lining up around the block. Well, there is. It's called neurophysiological quieting. It's called meditation, Tai Chi, Qigong. 20 minutes a day on average is thought to be beneficial. That can be 2 10-minute experiences, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. It can be 1 20-minute experience, whatever works for you. Finally, you know, as we're working with stress and pain and knowing that both of those are protective outputs of the brain to try to help us navigate our lives and ourselves, we want to be curious about our own stress response and our own pain, perhaps in a very different way than what we have been before. We want very much to hold ourselves with as much self-compassion as we can, while understanding, you know, impermanence. Regardless of what spiritual beliefs or religious beliefs you may or may not hold, in this physical human incarnation, we're here once, and the time that we spend is precious and short. And again, I think the really stark, blunt reminders of our own impermanence and our mortality, especially in this last year, have been pretty significant for us. And if there is stress that is not helping us, being able to let that go. If there is self-judgment or self-criticism that is certainly not helping us, being able to let that go. Being able to be curious observers of ourselves as we learn and struggle and grow. And trying to be flexible with ourselves as much as we can. So again, questions to consider, questions to ask ourselves as we get ready to wrap up this section. Is this particular situation, event, person, is this worth a stress response? Yes, it is. No, it's not. Maybe, but it's here anyway. And if you are having a stress response, can we really imagine and understand and have some appreciation for this is the body coming to my aid and being a helper, a protector, not the enemy. The stress response is not the enemy. A stress response is not indicative of we're not coping well. If we can have a stress response, in fact, we're doing really well. Can we see it as a protector? You know, can we see it as that own superhero helping us and relax and breathe and help slow the horse down? Finally, we come to functional goal setting, which we've spent quite a bit of time on today. So hopefully you've got some really good directions with those functional goals. For last time, we talked about things that you say to yourself that are Sims. Remember, we're doing Sims here. We're intentionally searching for Sims, not DIMs. And maybe in your search last week, you were aware that actually a lot of the things that maybe others say to you or you say to yourself are actually DIMs. That's really helpful if you noticed DIMs that you're saying to yourself, because those can be changed. Probably the most helpful sim that I offer myself is the one that I've already shared, which is if I'm having a hard time, just noticing that, having a hard time right now. And I'm doing the best I can right now. I'm doing the best that I can. Isn't that true, regardless of how it may look to others or how it may feel? So those are the Sims about what I say to myself. For next time, we will be looking for Sims about things that you think and believe about yourself, about others, about pain, about stress, about everything. Okay? And a final thought for you comes from the wonderful Viktor Frankl, who wrote this after World War II and after he and his family were in concentration camp, and he lost most of his family in concentration camp. And then afterwards emerged and wrote books, wonderful books, including Man's Search for Meaning. And this is a quote from Viktor Frankl. Everything can be taken from a man or a person, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And thinking about his context and his experience coming from a situation of being in a concentration camp, not knowing if he would survive, knowing that a lot of his family and many millions of others did not survive, that has a different level of power to me. So I share that with you in hopes that all of what we are talking about with regard to self-compassion, slowing down, being in the moment, is to help us find those choice points. It's to help us find, okay, given this situation of stress or given this situation of pain that wasn't asked for, that wasn't chosen, how is it that I can re-find that human freedom of being able to choose a response? Okay, so I offer that to you in that spirit, and I hope that you go well and take good care of yourself, that you are looking at functional goals in the Pain Truth, and that you're thinking about your Sims, that you are outside in nature, that you are curious about what it would be like to schedule your own self-care first, even in 5-minute increments. You can do a lot with 5 minutes. And I leave you, of course, with one last cartoon. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. It's great to have you here, and I'll see you next time.